You won't believe what happened when I took a quiet weekend trip to my own lakeside cabin, now only to have some HOA Karen try to run me off the property and call 911 on me. I was just trying to relax, grill some food, and enjoy the peaceful view I worked hard for when this woman stormed up like she owned the place. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't care to listen. She just launched into full control mode, demanding I pack up and leave immediately because I was trespassing on private property. Only problem, that private property she was talking about actually belongs to me. And not just the cabin, she had no idea I owned the land all around the lake. In fact, she didn't even know the entire county records had me listed as the legal owner. Yeah, she picked the wrong person to mess with. At first, I tried to be calm and polite, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding, but she wasn't having it. She started filming me with her phone, ranting about HOA rules and warning that police were on the way. I asked her again nicely to back off and let me enjoy my weekend, but she doubled down, yelling something about trespassers getting what they deserve. That's when I realized she didn't just think she was in charge, she truly believed it. And she had no idea who she was dealing with. When the sheriff finally pulled up, lights flashing, I thought things would calm down. But instead, that's when everything really started to unravel. You could literally see her confidence drain as the truth came out, piece by piece. But what happened next? Even I didn't see coming. Stick around, because this story is about to take a wild turn and, trust me, she never expected how it would end. So here's a little backstory to all this madness. A few years back, I came across this gorgeous stretch of land by the lake, secluded, quiet. It's not tied to any active HOA. The land had gone off the radar somehow. It's probably due to a bunch of old paperwork and some county zoning mix-ups. I did my homework, ran all the records, and ended up buying not just the cabin, but the surrounding parcels too. What most people don't realize is that some of these old lakefront communities have been forgotten by the city and the HOA that once operated here. It was dissolved years ago, but apparently no one told Karen she moved in about a year ago, according to a local I chatted with. Ever since, she's been walking around like the unofficial mayor of the lake, barking out rules and trying to enforce HOA guidelines that no longer even exist. Neighbors either ignore her or keep their heads down to avoid drama, but I guess I didn't get that memo. And let me tell you, the moment she saw me unpacking my truck, setting up my grill, and lighting a fire in the pit, it was like I triggered some kind of HOA security alarm in her head. She marched down the hill, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, and just started laying into me, telling me there were rules about noise, about open fires, about guest stays. I kept trying to explain that I wasn't a guest, he was the owner, but it didn't matter. In her eyes, I didn't belong. And instead of checking facts, she jumped straight to calling the sheriff like she expected them to haul me away without asking questions. That's when things really started to heat up. And little did she know, she wasn't just picking a fight with a cabin owner. She was challenging the actual landowner of the entire area, as I stood there waiting for the sheriff to step out of his cruiser. Karen kept pacing near the driveway like she was giving herself a pep talk. She waved him over the second he parked, pointing aggressively in my direction like I was some sort of threat. The weird part? I hadn't even raised my voice. I was standing next to my own fire pit with a hot dog still on the stick. The sheriff glanced at me, then back at her, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Before I could speak, Karen started rattling off her version of the story, something about a trespasser refusing to leave HOA-managed land, endangering the community, and violating quiet hours. But as soon as the sheriff asked her which HOA she was referring to, her confidence started to crack. She stumbled over her words, talking about legacy rules and neighbor agreements, but had nothing official to show. Meanwhile, I pulled out a copy of the deed and the property map right from my truck's glove box. Now, Here's where it gets even messier. As the sheriff studied the documents, another neighbor came walking down the path. His name was Mark Holder. Guy retired, and probably the only person in the area who remembered when the original HOA disbanded. He saw what was going on and gave me a slight nod. Then he looked at the sheriff and said, "He's the owner of all of it. She's been causing problems since she moved in." Karen's face went pale, but she didn't back off. Instead, she turned on Mark, accusing him of siding with outsiders and not caring about preserving the community. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me staying at my cabin. This was about control, power, and a woman who thought she could make up her own rules. But as the tension thickened and more neighbors started gathering, the real question hung in the air. How far was Karen willing to go to keep up the illusion of authority, and what would happen when the truth spread through the community? The sheriff handed my paperwork back slowly, eyes narrowing just a bit as he glanced toward Karen, who was now standing stiff like she was trying to hold on to whatever authority she had left. But instead of leaving it there, she doubled down. She pulled out her phone again and started dialing someone, loud enough for everyone to hear, saying she was escalating this to the county board and claiming I was forging documents. I didn't even know whether to laugh or be concerned. She wasn't just mistaken anymore, she was spiraling. The small group of neighbors who had started to gather was growing by the minute. Some stood on porches, others leaned against fences, all whispering, eyes darting between me, Karen, and Dad. The sheriff. It was like the whole Lakeside community had been holding their breath for a moment like this. Mark stayed close, arms crossed, while a woman named Rachel, who I later learned was part of a failed HOA revival committee, stepped forward and started trying to calm Karen down. But it backfired. Karen turned on her too, accusing Rachel of being complicit in allowing squatters. The word hung in the air for a second. Squatter. That's what she thought I was this whole time. Despite the clear ownership, the cabin I maintained, the property taxes I'd been paying for years, none of that mattered to her. It was about what she believed she could enforce. Then, out of nowhere, another car rolled up. This time, it wasn't law enforcement. It was someone from the county records office. I'd called earlier when things first started heating up, not thinking they'd actually show. But there they were, stepping out with a briefcase and a printout that was about to make everything a lot more real. The sheriff looked at Karen, then at the official, and then at me. You could feel it, that thick silence before something breaks. Every eye in the neighborhood was locked in. No one moved. And in that moment, I knew the showdown wasn't over. It was just about to hit its peak. The county official stepped forward, holding a thick file with printed records and satellite images of the land. You could practically hear Karen grinding her teeth as she tried to keep her composure. The official nodded at the sheriff and introduced himself calmly, flipping open the file. "According to our database," he began, "this cabin and the surrounding parcels, including the public lake access road, are fully deeded to Mr. Reynolds." That's me. In fact, he added, there hasn't been a recognized HOA here for over a decade. It was dissolved in 2013 and never legally reformed. But before anyone could react, Karen interrupted, voice rising. "That's not right. There's supposed to be a new HOA. Submitted paperwork last spring." Her voice cracked with desperation, and for the first time, she looked unsure. The county rep blinked. "Ma'am, if you submitted documents, they were never processed or approved through official channels. There's no legal authority to enforce anything here." That's when the twist came. Mark, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly stepped forward again, but this time his voice was colder. "Tell them the rest, Karen, about the meetings, the votes you forged." A few neighbors gasped. Karen spun around, stunned. "That's a lie," she snapped. But Rachel stepped in too. "I saw the papers. Karen, you signed names of people who don't even live here anymore. You were trying to take control of the lake access road and force people into paying dues again." The sheriff's radio buzzed faintly in the background, but no one moved. All eyes were now on Karen, who looked completely cornered. The tension in the air was sharp. This wasn't just a case of mistaken ownership anymore. This was something bigger. Fraud, deception, and now a very public unraveling. But just when? I thought it couldn't get any more surreal. The county official looked at me and said, "There's actually something else you need to see about your land deed. Something unusual we just noticed this morning." That sentence alone made my stomach drop. The plot wasn't just thickening, it was boiling over. Just when the tension seemed like it had reached its peak, the front doors of the community center slammed open. All heads turned. It was Officer Daniels, flanked by two plainclothes investigators. Karen froze mid-sentence, her face pale. The agents quietly approached the HOA table, handed over a folded document, and whispered something to the board president. His face went stiff as he read. The room fell into a heavy silence. Then he stood up and cleared his throat, barely able to make eye contact with the crowd. "It appears there's been a federal investigation into misuse of HOA funds," he announced, "and multiple complaints linked to intimidation and abuse of authority." Gasps broke out across the room. Karen's smug expression melted away completely. "What? That's ridiculous," she said, stumbling back. But before she could say more, one of the agents approached her and calmly said, "Karen Adams, we need to speak with you outside regarding several ongoing complaints and falsified incident reports." Whispers rippled through the audience. Parents exchanged stunned glances. Ms. Green, the quiet neighbor from across the street, finally stood up. "I told you all something was wrong. She's been targeting people and covering it up," she said, holding up a folder full of printed emails. "And TIMESTAMP. As Karen was escorted outside, the board president sat down heavily, burying his face in his hands. It was over. The community had been manipulated for years, but now the truth was finally in the open. Relief and disbelief hung in the air. But just as the crowd began to disperse and breathe again, the investigator's radio crackled. A voice came through, reporting that a locked storage unit registered under the HOA's name had just been opened and it was filled with dozens of confiscated packages and missing mail that residents had reported stolen over the past year. The entire room went still. Again, that twist left everyone shaken. This wasn't just about power or harassment anymore. It hinted at something bigger, something no one saw coming. Over the next few days, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but not without change. News of the stolen packages discovered in the HOA's storage unit spread fast, and more residents came forward with stories they had once been too afraid to share. It turned out Karen had been intercepting packages from people she didn't like, using her authority to justify fake violations and keep them quiet. She even had a small group of loyal followers who helped her cover it all up. But after the investigation, most of them disappeared from the neighborhood meetings entirely. Officer Daniels assured the community that all evidence was now in the hands of law enforcement. Karen was officially removed from her position, and new elections were held. This time, real transparency was promised. Ms. Green, once overlooked, was voted in as the new HOA president. She started weekly town hall-style meetings where everyone could voice concerns openly. People began talking to each other more, smiling in the streets again. A sense of trust was slowly returning. Even the kids who were once shouted at for riding bikes on the sidewalk now felt safe again. Their parents no longer feared retaliation for simple misunderstandings. The fear Karen had created was finally gone. One neighbor summed it up best at the next meeting. It's not just about packages or power, it's about treating each other with respect. In the end, what started as a string of small complaints unraveled a web of control no one expected. The community learned that silence only helps those who misuse authority. And while the scars would take time to fade, the neighborhood was no longer divided. It was rebuilding stronger, kinder, and finally free from fear.